So I'm very happy to be here today with Miguel Grinberg, the author of the Flask Mega-Tutorial. So Miguel, welcome to the interview with Python Ireland.
Yeah, thank you. So I am from Argentina, lived in three different continents throughout my. Then I moved to the United States. I lived in the States for about 20 years. I am now in Ireland. I've been here for going to 7 years now.
So yeah, so let's just get right into it. So I think the first question I have is, I suppose taking you back to, was it 2012 when you first got into it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
2012, right?
Well, what made you pick up Flask in particular at that time rather than something else?
Yeah, so at the time, I already decided that I liked Python very much. I was coming from a C plus background. And at work at the time, we needed to make our C plus code more easier to use. And we were using Python as a wrapper library. When the idea came that I should start blogging, like many people in those years, I had a friendly competition with my wife about this. She started blogging before me and was doing well. So I wanted to do it as well. Instead of just picking a blog software, I decided to write blog software myself to then use it to blog. There was actually only one that was major, and that was Django. And I didn't find it very interesting because of all the complexity. The learning curve was steep. The two that I noticed more were Flask and Bottle. I tried them both, and Flask seemed a little bit more, the ecosystem around it seemed a little bit more active than for Bottle. So I now had an empty blog and needed to decide what to write about. The only idea that came to me is maybe I should write about writing Flask applications, which is what I just did. Right. So that was the idea. And then that's how it started. I wasn't an expert in Flask or Python at the time. I had very little experience actually. But I decided to start writing about it and see what happened.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And also, Flask was not in the minds of most Python engineers at the time. Just to give you context, I believe the version that I've used at the time was 0.6, I believe, right?
Not
So
we don't.
it was different than what it is today. It had a lot less things.
Great timing.
So it was great timing. And if I had chosen Django, but Flask, nobody was doing it, right?
You're there at the beginning, great chance to influence what's going on. How have you found that journey writing and teaching about Flask the last 13 years or so?
Yeah, it's actually writing with the intention to teach, but indirectly that allowed me to learn Flask.
Yeah, that's interesting. The kind of move to full stack or having a front end as part of Flask. That's something that's always been very attractive to me, to a single repo and as a Python developer to be able to see the results of your work and at least do a draft or some kind of reasonable front end. Have you ever ventured into the dark side, into the kind of JavaScript React side of things?
Maybe you don't know this. There's also a React Mega-Tutorial. I did a tutorial for React, which is actually the main framework that I use when I have to do front ends. And like the Mega-Tutorial, both tutorials are freely available on the blog. Or if you want to support me, you can also buy the book.
Yeah, you're basically covering the full stack for anyone who wants to really go full stack, which has become quite a trend in the last few years.
It is. And Flask is positioned, not only Flask, these days, Flask is not the only one. Let's recognize FastAPI, for example, is also in the same category. It's a good fit for these lightweight frameworks where the backend, it's dedicated to maintaining the storage, database, and then everything else you do in JavaScript in the front end. I believe React is a really good framework to do your front ends. So you can use what I show in the Flask Mega-Tutorial, which is backend centric. There are newer options. There's HTMX, a framework that a lot of people are using. I have also implemented an extension for Flask to allow you to use Turbo.js. It's similar to HTMX, but it covers the same need, which is to implement front ends without writing JavaScript.
Fantastic. There's many ways up the mountain for people. You can stick in the Grinberg universe and go with, Flask Mega-Tutorial, React Mega-Tutorial. That'll be a really nice, well-rounded skill set at the end of it.
It follows my own learning path as well, right?
I suppose the last 10 years, the whole microservice idea and light web app idea has become much more prevalent. FastAPI now, Django is still going strong.
So I think there is a little bit of a competition. I'm not going to deny that. FastAPI is rising, right? Django, with its batteries included approach, is going to work more for the enterprisey developers where you don't want to start looking for solutions. Then Flask is great. FastAPI is strong in the same areas, except that it works asynchronously. So now you have the two leaders in the async or sync sides. So today, if I need to start a new project, if I have to write standard Python, then I would use Flask. If I need to do it asynchronously, I would use FastAPI. I have my own web framework right now as well, which is one of the minority ones with a very specific need. But if I have to go with the major options, those are the options. I will be unlikely to use Django myself because that's not, I want to make choices. Django does not work for me, but FastAPI does and Flask does as well.
It sounds like the ecosystem is just getting richer, more diverse.
I think in the end, everybody wins. One thing that I really like is the people who use FastAPI who learned it by following the Flask Mega-Tutorial, because they're actually very similar, right? The Flask Mega-Tutorial touches on a lot of topics that are not specific to Flask. And for example, I make use of SQL Alchemy.
Yes.
I use Elasticsearch, for example,
Yes.
which is completely agnostic of the framework, and many other things, right?
Yeah.
All the JavaScript related content, there's a little bit of JavaScript in the Flask Mega-Tutorial that translates to anything else, right? It really makes me very happy. I learned of someone who learned FastAPI or anything non-Flask using my tutorial.
Another question then, I suppose, the audience, like maybe for Flask and also for your tutorial over the last 12, 13 years, have you seen the audience change at all?
Definitely, you cannot ignore the data science crowd, which was, I didn't have any visibility into that side of Python 13 years ago, and they really grew in a really big way. One interesting thing that I noticed is that in the beginning, I always had to demonstrate that Flask was good enough for people. The most common question I received was, can I do a big project with Flask?
Yeah.
People assumed it was a toy framework. It was tiring to have to defend Flask, but people had serious concerns. And I'm happy to say that in the last 5 years or so, that went away. Nobody doubts that Flask is up to the task, whatever the task might be.
Do you find yourself using AI yourself, Miguel, in your development workflow or writing workflow?
Yeah. So GitHub, it's nice to give me a free subscription to GitHub Copilot. I don't think I will pay for it. I said, okay, I'm just going to put it there and see what it does. Many times I compare what I write with what GitHub Copilot suggests. It's not great. For any kind of professional work, coming from the other side where you're experienced, I don't really see a lot of value because it was trained on all the code on GitHub, right?
Yeah.
Every time I look at a suggestion that GitHub Copilot offers, I feel that I can do better, given that when I'm working on code, this is code that I'm going to have to maintain. It's not throwaway code, right?
That's interesting. I've seen some of the results of vibe coding over the last couple of years, or some colleagues of mine. Certainly one colleague of mine has seen some disasters and that has been brought in.
I think what we are going to need going forward is we're going to need to be very good at code reviewing. You cannot take code that comes from an unknown source and assume because it works that it's good and that you will be able to maintain it, right? You really have to do a good review.
People often do say that it's harder to read code than to write code sometimes.
You're going to have to make sure that the code that the AI is giving you, at least if you get paid to do the work. If you're doing this for work professionally, I don't see how you can blindly trust AI. You're going to have to learn and understand. You will need to be able to write what you're asking the AI to write for you.
It sounds like we're going to need people with mastery to supervise what's going on in this space. Just on a completely different note, I guess it's a quick question on your interest in MicroPython, because I just saw a reference to it in your bio.
I moved to Ireland 6 or 7 years ago. The house that I rented had a climate, right? Which is something that in the States does not exist. This is an Irish company, I believe, that produces these smart heating controls, right? You control your heating with an app, right? And so this house had one of those. The thermostats that were used were very inaccurate. The house was cold most of the time. It was not a linear difference with the actual temperature that you can adjust. It was unpredictable. I couldn't find a way to configure it to keep the house at the temperature level that I wanted. This thing has an API. I said, okay, maybe I'll investigate what can I do to improve this. I found MicroPython, right? And then you can write a little application that runs in a microcontroller. This is a very tiny computer. It just runs your code. So typically when you write code in C or C++ for these devices, but MicroPython now allows us to write Python, and you can attach a thermometer to the device, right? So you get this microcontroller board connected with a thermometer. These are all things that you can buy for really cheap. You don't need to have hardware knowledge beyond the basics. You can write Python code that gets you the temperature in the room that you are.
Fantastic. I think a lot of people are getting interested in this space. The whole maker movement is growing in Ireland.
I have an accepted talk for EuroPython in Prague this July. And that's also MicroPython related.
Miguel, just to bring it back to the main topic, which is the Flask Mega-Tutorial, you did a full-scale revision in 2024. What are the improvements and the goodies that get users?
The main driver for that revision was the Flask 3.0 release. I started from the goal of making the tutorial fully compatible with Flask 3.0. Another major thing this revision includes is support for Bootstrap as a UI library. The 2024 revision upgrades Bootstrap to 5.3, which is still the current release. There's a third one, which is the upgrade to SQL Alchemy 2. Alchemy went through a really major change between the 1.x's and the 2.0. This tutorial, the 2024 edition, is fully compliant with the SQL Alchemy 2 release, which uses type hints, for example, that people wanted. They wanted SQL Alchemy to allow you to define your models, your database models, using Python type hints. And this version has that. And this is included in this revision.
Okay. Yeah, I must go back to it. And I'd advise anyone listening to have a look. And of course, you have the book as well. Do you want to just talk a little bit about the book for anyone who wants to?
So this was born as blog series, but at some point I decided to package the tutorial, which is the same content. If you prefer to have it in book format, there's a book. I initially self-published it both as Kindle or paperback. And now the book is also published by the Pragmatic Bookshelf, which provides the ebook in DRM-free formats. If you're using any readers that are not Kindle, you can get it and use it that way.
Yeah, you can't beat a book sometimes. I think that's really nice to have that option. Obviously, you've done a huge amount for the open source community around Python and Flask. How would you advise people? How would you tell people on getting involved in Python Ireland, getting involved in open source projects? What do you think the benefits are for people to do something like that?
So you and I both are involved with the Python Ireland organization, and this organization has a number of projects. I usually lend my time to help as a reviewer, and anybody interested can reach out. This is going to help with the organization of Python Ireland, for example, right?
Yeah.
And the list of projects are very interesting. You have to let other people do the work, doing reviews and making sure that everything, mentoring, whatever it takes, and for the people who actually do the contributions.
Yeah. Amazing opportunity for people just to get that experience and to have really good coders reviewing.
These are real projects that are going to be used immediately.
If anyone wants to get started on a project, plenty of work for people to do and experience Pythonistas like Miguel there to support and mentor. Amazing opportunity. And then I suppose the final thing is, Miguel, you're going to be with us in Workday for our monthly meetup next week, April the 9th. And what are you going to be talking about?
So this presentation is going to be centered around the Flask Mega-Tutorial. The message that I'm going to try to share is that everybody should write about something they feel passionate about, some project that they do, because that not only helps the people who find your content, but it helps you as well, right? Everything then grows. I wasn't known in the Python ecosystem at all, and a lot of things happened to me professionally just because I decided to write on my blog. It takes little effort. It's difficult to write. You feel like you're not good. There's a level of imposter syndrome there. So you should push through that and keep doing it. And eventually, I promise you, it gets easier. And then you're going to see the rewards, right? You're going to learn more about what you write. You will become an expert in the matters that you write about.
That's a great way to end the interview with that advice, Miguel. Fantastic stuff. Thank you for talking with us today. And
Thank you for having me.
always a pleasure. And we'll see you next week, Workday.
Bye-bye.